Alright, so this is the next mini lecture where we're talking about the pulmonary vasculature, the blood supply and drainage of the lungs. And the focus is going to be on the last two objectives here, way at the bottom, talking about the arterial supply, venous drainage, nerve supply, and lymphatic drainage. So talking about the pulmonary vasculature, the first thing you need to really understand is that the lungs have a dual blood supply. They have the pulmonary arteries and veins, which are going to be supplying blood that is going to be oxygenated and then carried back to the lungs. And then there is a bronchial artery. There are bronchial arteries and veins, which are really supplying the lung tissues to give nutrients and drain away byproducts of metabolism. Okay, so the pulmonary system is responsible for just the oxygenation of the blood, and then the other is responsible for more the nutritive and supply of the actual tissues of the lung. Alright, so the pulmonary arteries. You have a pulmonary trunk, and that's highlighted. I have an image that shows the pulmonary trunk. So highlighted in blue here is the pulmonary trunk. Follow the arrow down. The pulmonary trunk is the major vessel that's coming off the right ventricle carrying deoxygenated blood away from the heart to get to the lungs. The pulmonary trunk branches into a left pulmonary artery and a right pulmonary artery. Remember, artery and vein is named according to the direction of blood flow, not what type of oxygenated or deoxygenated blood that's present in it. So you have a right pulmonary vein, which you can see is traveling toward the right lung underneath the arch of the aorta and behind the superior vena cava. So highlighted by the green circle is the aorta, which is in red on the right, and then the superior vena cava, which is in blue on the left. So the right pulmonary artery is heading behind those structures and going to the lungs. So I mention those relationships because in anatomy, when you're talking about all these different structures, it's really important to understand how they relate to one another within the chest cavity. The left side, the left pulmonary artery, is traveling directly to the lungs, and then at this point, they branch sequentially, just like the bronchial tree, into all those different branches that you see. The pulmonary veins, excuse me, which are highlighted in red, are following that same bronchial patterns, but they're carrying oxygenated blood back toward the heart. Ultimately, they're going to end up on the right side with two major vessels, which are highlighted by the two red circles, so two pulmonary veins. And on the left, there are ultimately two pulmonary veins that are going to carry oxygenated blood to the left atrium, where it will then go to the left ventricle, pumped out through the aorta and through the rest of the circulatory system. So those are the pulmonary vessels. The bronchial vessels, the bronchial arteries, are much smaller arteries, and again, the bronchial arteries are supplying the tissues of the lungs, okay, so that they can get their oxygenation and their nutrients from a vascular source. So where are they going to? Mainly near the hilum of the lung, also the support tissues within the lung, and the visceral pleura. Okay, we'll talk about pleura in the next recording. These bronchial arteries come primarily off the aorta, okay, and there is some anastomosis with the pulmonary arteries. Okay. Anastomosis, again, is that connection. The bronchial veins are going to be draining the lung, but primarily they're draining in the proximal regions of the lung, okay, around the hilum, in that region where branching is just beginning. On the right side, the bronchial veins are going to be draining to the azygos vein, and on the left side to the hemiazygos vein. And again, those veins are going to be mentioned in other lectures. Okay, so that's the vasculature: bronchial system, pulmonary system. The pulmonary innervation, primarily a physiologic system. A couple of things that I'll highlight: the sympathetic system. Okay, so it would be important to review some of the autonomic nervous system within your physiology section. The sympathetic system the fibers from the sympathetic system are ultimately going to end up in the pulmonary plexus. A plexus is just a collection of nerves, in this case, that form this network. So the pulmonary plexus is for the lungs. For the parasympathetic system, the vagus nerve is responsible for sending parasympathetic information to the pulmonary plexus, where it will then give motor and sensory. Okay? And then you can see through this list what each system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, what its function is within the lungs. And here's an image that just helps to show you that. So you have the parasympathetic through the vagus in green, the sympathetic through the paravertebral ganglia, traveling to the pulmonary plexus, which is in blue, and then you get that, again, that plexus, which is that network of nerves. Okay, so that's just a basic overview of the innervation of the lungs. Much more of a physiologic function, which you'll learn later on. Lymphatic drainage, again, you have lymphatic tissue, lymphatic fluid, which needs to be drained away from the lungs. And so what happens is you can divide the lungs sort of into a superficial lymphatic plexus, which is that fluid that's being drained primarily from the lung tissue and the pleura, which is a connective tissue sheet that covers the lungs. And then you have the deep lymphatic plexus, which is draining just the roots of the lung, just right at the base of the lung, right near the hilum. Then what happens is, though all that lymphatic fluid is going to drain to a collection of lymph nodes that surround the hilum, and they are called the hilar lymph nodes, or the bronchopulmonary lymph nodes. From there, they are going to, and those are highlighted by the orange circles right at the hilum. And then from there, the lymphatic tissue is going to travel to the green area, which are the tracheobronchial lymph nodes, which is right at the tracheal bifurcation, right where the trachea is bifurcating. And then from there, the lymphatic fluid on the right side is going to drain into the right lymphatic duct, which is a major lymphatic duct that's going to ultimately empty into the venous system. And then on the left side, it's draining into the thoracic duct, which is ultimately going to drain into the venous system on the left side. And then it enters the venous circulation, and it mixes with the venous blood and gets recirculated again. So that's lymphatic drainage. That's the neurovasculature of the lungs. Next, we'll talk about the pleura.